So just looking at teaching standard 6, make accurate and productive use of assessment. So just looking at the start point is our teaching standards, looking at TS6 again, so it's just understand how to assess relevant subject curriculum knowledge, make formative and summative assessment, which we'll look to go on throughout this standard, and give pupils regular feedback both orally and through accurate marking, and encourage students to respond to feedback. Just a few things just to point out before we go on, which I'll look to discuss throughout this. So looking at a target set in one of my mentor meetings, so it was assessment week coming up, and we had a theory-based, I had a year 7 few lessons, and they had to prepare them for their theory exam and had to offer them feedback. So the target we set for this week was to ensure you monitor students' theory-based grades by marking accurate assessments through marking and offer student feedback to ensure they make progress. I would do this by preparing them for the end of unit exam and offer them feedback afterwards through the marking. So just moving on here. So Gadsby and Beer 2012 suggests that assessment is the process of gathering information from learners about what they know. In this, teachers interpret evidence so they can decide where the students are in their learning and where they need to develop. Support this, Berry and Adamson 2011 summarise assessment as the process of identifying the extent of pupils' learning. So as I said, we had a revision-based lesson to prepare our Year 7s for a theory-based lesson that had coming up. So they would have for a numbers week, there'd be a PowerPoint of key topics for them to revise for homework on our theory base. So we had one actual theory lesson which I looked to prepare them for as a bit of a revision, so they should have been doing it at home. And we went on to the plan I made for the lesson of before their exam. So just to know what contributes to health, to understand how health can impact sport performance, and evaluate the benefits of health from participating. So, as I said, it was a revision-based lesson, and I allowed them to have a bit of a guided discovery approach by the working groups of threes, and we're looking at 3 components of health and well-being, which were the physical, emotional, and social health. That's the PowerPoint I used throughout the lesson. However, to start with, I allowed them to go off on their phones and research or double check or make notes on a specific aspect of the health, which they were going to be looking at feeding back to the rest of the group. So I just said that throughout this, I was going around doing over-the-shoulder marking to offer feedback and assessment of their work and what they'd put down. So this immediate feedback allowed them to build on points or add to it additionally as required. And I said the main progress check for this lesson was over-the-shoulder marking, and it would be seen in the exam paper the next lesson. So just moving on to the actual PowerPoint I used. So we went through this, and we went through a variety of the health and just preparing them for the exam paper, which they knew they had to set. And it's unfortunate, but it's a school-based project which they have to do, and there's a number of just following the school policies. So here was the Year 7 test, which I actually made and had them prepared, and I sent this out to a number of the teachers because I was in charge of creating the Year 7 one, and I also created the mark scheme for this. So after they had sat the test, I went through and marked them all for my Year 7 group, and throughout that I gave a mark for each one. However, I put a comment after each question where they could have picked up additional marks, or just throughout the question for the multiple choice, check your notes and re-answer what makes up health for the actual question 1 there, and there's a few more interesting. So just looking at serotonin to make sure what makes you feel good, for example. Again, just looking at when they got the correct answer, we're looking at commenting good, or we need to expand to allow them to make comments and adjustments to their work. So here was one where they didn't score any and they lost 4 marks for it. So So I've said what are the personal qualities you need, and you've given physical and emotional benefits, not just the personal qualities. Again, we're looking to define, give definition of what they need for good health. And just throughout here, right at the end, I just made some comments. Need to show you understand what training program it is, what if it's going wrong, how do you receive these benefits. So it was just a number, and here's just another paper you can look for if you feel necessary. But it was just the fact of giving them comments and giving them questions to answer that initial feedback from the paper to help them develop that understanding if it wasn't already there. But yeah, just giving those comments, and at the start of the next lesson they were so at the start of our next practical lesson we gave 15 minutes at the start to decide to go through and correct their papers, just so they not just lean to a side. So the importance of this summative assessment. Summative assessment is a process of measuring outcomes of students' learning at the end of a specific period of a scheme of work. Gill 2017. Beyond this, in the classroom, summative assessment should not only give students a chance to demonstrate their conceptual understanding, but also give students the opportunity to think critically as they apply their understanding. So that use of summative assessment was effective as it allowed them to show me what they have been doing for their own priority revision over the last last month or so, and also how my teaching of that revision lesson had impacted their learning and how we do it. So we're just looking at, that was one form of a summative assessment which we're looking at. I'm just going to go into a form of formative assessment through a lesson. It was actually another assessment lesson within football, so it's actually at the end of a scheme of work again. So it's a bit like a summative assessment, but we're just looking at more how a formative approach was adopted in here. So here was as I said, it was an assessment lesson for the same group of students. The reason why I'm going over the two is because at the school we do the theory-based element and the practical, and you combine the results and give them an overall assessment grade. So that's why I've just gone through both forms, and you'll see that later on through the student tracker also. Excuse me. So yeah, within this, it was an assessment lesson, I left it as a game-based lesson, and throughout that I allowed a lot of peer assessment, and they had a success criteria which criteria which was just here, which the students were going to place themselves and a partner against the success criteria. So if they achieved it, they would put their initials and move on. So we did this twice throughout the lesson. So one time I let the student have the gameplay here in the first activity, and then we used a discussion to go through and peer assess of what they thought their partner is working on. I gave them some time to watch, and through that I allowed them to offer each other feedback and receive feedback from another person. So we just go through an example just here. So what we did you can see the black pen, they initialed where they thought they was at. Black pen was the first time, so midway through, and we looked at, then they as a group, as a pair, they had to offer them each other feedback of how they can look to improve to achieve the higher levels. But in the meantime, while I was doing this, or afterwards, I let them go off and play again and show me how they can develop. I went around to each of their comments, and I put in red pen where I thought the students were at. So Pablo, actually, I thought he was working more towards these sorts of level 3s, level 4s compared to where he'd put in his black pen here. So that meant that he received that feedback, and I made a comment as I went around. So like Pablo, to achieve level 5, you need to consider more highlighted areas. So he needed specifically to look at controlling the ball with all parts of your body in pressurized competitive situations, and influence the game in both attacking and defensive for periods of play, not just one-off occasions. So that use of initial feedback allowed them to refer to it during the lesson, to go through and see how they're looking to develop. Again, for Ben here, I said to achieve level 7 because he was one of my higher end students. using correct technique and timings and displays of the ball. So I gave them that initial feedback. So they had a target to work on in their next game or when they went out, because we had a few breaks in play where I enabled them to see if we moved that. With that in mind, you can see where that was using their black pen for the first time they went out. So when they went and assessed themselves the second time, I allowed them to use a green pen to see if they'd moved up. So Pablo, first of all, Ben rated him as level 1 to 2, and following that feedback he received, he moved up and he put himself more into these levels 3 and 4. Similar to Ben, Pablo suggested that Ben was scoring levels 3 to 4 in these two sections, however not in this section, but however in the first time. However, when they self-assessed themselves again or peer assessed themselves again, Ben sort of moved up, and that's from my feedback and from each other, receiving feedback from each other, which helps. Just looking at that's the more formative assessment which we looked at. So husband and peers suggest that formative assessment useful in improving outcomes from learners. To support this, Hattie 2012 suggests that the most powerful single influence to enhance students' achievement is valuable feedback through formative assessment. So using that research, it is clear here that the students did improve their performance, and that was demonstrated here from that feedback which I gave them as well as each other. So that use of formative assessment was used. So as I said about it was the end of the scheme of work, so it was essential for me as part of the department that I had to give a formative or a summative assessment at the end. So I used this same success criteria, and I just sort of placed them, each student, where I thought they were sort of in line. So if I thought, so here was BS again from Ben in the last, where he worked out, and we sort of said that he was in the middle. We had that discussion, especially with him, as he was an example I used. And I sort of placed him in here, so I knew that he was in level 6. So just when I had to implement their assessment levels, again here, like these students be like level 5. If I can find just Pablo where he was, so Pablo, we suggested that Pablo was level about 4, and that can be evident also here because he was in between the level 3 and 4. So yeah, so I just used their initials so it was quick and easy for me to assess them, and I also pulled them out through questioning to show that they had that understanding as well, so it wasn't just their own ability, and that can be seen in the lesson plan which I planned for. So Bear and Adamson suggest that assessment outcomes can be communicated by means of numerical expressions of marks or in verbal reports. So as I said, for why I have shown you the two different forms of assessment was that I used my student tracker. So I implemented the assessment grades from the football and I implemented them into here. And we can see, so there was Pablo's 4 and Ben was his 6 there. And using that form of assessment allowed them to develop their grades, and they was informed, and they knew how to, because they had that assessment criteria which we worked throughout the whole scheme of work. I always had it out, and they knew what was required to improve, and they looked to know that for their own personal benefit. Also here is where I implemented the theory grades and from each lesson. So again, sort of Ben worked 48% and Pablo 60%. Obviously I did this for all the students, whether there was just 2 examples I'm using in this clear standard to make it obvious for you. So afterwards I was in charge of confirming the overall assessment grades for that term for my year 7 group, who was working with Matt Clark, my mentor. Obviously I took his grades and he was then implemented them into the report cards. So I had to combine both grades and give them a overall assessment here. So Ben and Pablo are not actually on there, but yeah, so it just shows them. If we can look at example for Henry, for example, he got a 4 on his assessment but 80% on his theory, so he ended up coming out with a 6. So I used the formula which I was instructed. So yeah, so that's just looking at how I've just a quick snapshot really of how I've assessed throughout my time at Gateway Academy, because I've looked to use a variety of different assessment formats and throughout every lesson, but it's just showing you a format how I used both summative and formative all in one to combine to get their end of term grades. So here's a reference list if you'd like to have a look, or feel free to look through any more of my evidence further. Yeah, that's just evidence for Teaching Standard 6. Thank you.